So my name is Lochlan Dulson, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. I work for Cumbria Woodlands, and I'm the project manager for the Woodland Futures project. Management of forests in like a more holistic way, and CCF in particular, has fascinated me ever since university. And it's one of my biggest sort of passions and hopes for the future. But I've had so little opportunity to do it, and I've got so little knowledge about it. Basically, I've created this webinar and field visit to educate myself, and then invited you all along. It's the selfish way around that it is. So the first thing that's happening is this webinar. Then we've got a field visit to Coombs Wood on the 23rd of April. And then sometime in the summer or autumn, so this is free, the field visit is free. Sometime in the summer or autumn, we're going to do a tree marking course, which is like the technical skills required to do crown thinning and marking. But more information on that will follow. Everybody that's on this list will get an email follow-up. So just a quick bit about Cumbria Woodlands. Cumbria Woodlands is a not-for-profit organisation. We've been working with people in woodlands in Cumbria for 30 years. We address gaps in the sector across creation, management, training, and development. We work on policy and advocacy. So a gap, not enough people are doing CCF. This is one of the solutions to that. Woodland Futures is a project within Cumbria Woodlands, partnership with Lake District Foundation, funded by the Trees Call to Action Fund, which is a DEFRA Forestry Commission and National Heritage Lottery Fund thing, and that's match funded by the Woodland Trust. So on the panel today, and some of them are presenting and others are there to answer and ask questions, we've got Edward Wilson. So Ted Wilson is a silviculturalist who specialises in sustainability, resilience, and conservation of temperate and boreal forest. He's worked in Canada and the UK and Ireland for over 35 years and delivered projects in more than 15 countries. So Ted's interests are in the areas of tree biology, woodland establishment, and silvicultural systems, especially CCF. His current focus is the transformation of even-age plantations to irregular structure forests. Ted's here to talk about theory. Chris Watson. Chris is a woodland resilience advisor for the Forestry Commission. He's worked as a manager for Forestry England, as a self-employed forestry contractor, and a lecturer at the University of Cumbria. So he's got, like, his unique range of experience seems to span the whole sector. And if you check his Instagram, which I sometimes do, he's always seems to be planting out in the woods in between policy meetings with DEFRA. So Dave Atkinson is the next person on the panel. Dave's been the senior forestry manager at Edwin Thompson since 2013, and he leads in providing professional forestry services to their woodland owners and clients. Prior to this, Dave worked for 6 years at the University of Cumbria's National School of Forestry, where he taught top student and prodigy future industry leader Lochlan Dulson. Before that, he worked for over 10 years in private sector forestry in West Scotland and for the Forestry Commission in Cumbria. So we've got Dave here to provide a practical viewpoint from the private sector. And finally, we've got Alex Baines. So Alex Baines is the forest manager for Coombs Wood, which we'll be visiting next month. Alex has been with Forestry England for 9 years. He started as an apprentice forest craftsperson in Cannock and then moved to the Lake District 2016. Since 2021, he's managed the Cumberland beat for Forestry England, which is made up of 13 forest blocks, including Coombs Wood, all of which present many opportunities and challenges. Most of his time spent managing and implementing an evolving thinning programme and controlling the spread of Phytophthora, which is often on steep ground, and he's often involved in the use of skyline and winch. So why are we doing this webinar? The time for me has never felt better to have this conversation, and the number of people that have showed up add weight to that. I think the perceived value of all of the things that forestry can provide, timber plus the range of ecosystem services, is growing, and it's reflected by policy, incentives, and emerging markets for nature-based solutions. And we as an industry need to be ready to apply ourselves to take advantage of all of these opportunities for ourselves, for our clients, for our woodlands, and for everybody that enjoys them. So the agenda for today, introduction, which we're halfway through, more than halfway through. Then we're going to have 20 minutes from Ted on theory, 15 minutes from Chris on policy, 20-minute Q&A from questions that have been sent in, and then a 20-minute live Q&A. That's flexible depending on how we go with the questions that have been sent in. If you'd like to put your questions in the chat, you're more than welcome to do that. We're not going to have time for them all. So I'm going to it'll be quite random. I'll pick from the chat. I'll ask people for their hands, things like that. But if you do put them in the chat, we'll try to address them afterwards. So I have a little thing to do with you first, which is Mentimeter. I'll ask you a few questions and then we're going to kick off with Ted. So bear with me for 2 seconds. So you should see this whiteboard appear with some questions. So as you put your questions in and hit send, they're going to appear on the screen and it's totally anonymous. Please don't be shy. It's good information just so we can all get a flavour of who's here and where we're from and what kind of thing we do. Munich, amazing. I was hoping there'd be one from a long way away, but a lot of Cumbria makes sense. Okay, thanks for that. We'll move on to the next question. So what's your job? Describe that any way you want. You can, I think you might even add more than one entry as well. The bigger they are, the more times people have entered them. So woodland officer right in the centre, forester, an advisor, trainee advisor. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. And what are you hoping to get out today? Enlightenment, brilliant. I'm going to say we can meet almost all of those in some way, so that's good news. And then this is a question, you know, whatever this means to you, have more than one entry because it's a complex thing. What is continuous cover forestry? What's your definition of it at the minute? And you could say, I don't know, that's completely acceptable. Brilliant, no idea. It's great information, thanks. And then this one, don't think about it too much. Try not to pick all of one thing. I know that it's like perfect, but like, listen to your own biases, I guess is what I'm saying. Everyone's got a favorite. You're managing a forest. Where are your priorities out of these 4? So you should be able to drag each slider into position. So we've got climate slightly in the lead, closely followed by nature and timber and people coming in last. So I find that really fascinating. And finally, I think, quick one. Are you coming to the visit on the 23rd of April? Yes or no? Notice there isn't a maybe. Amazing. So this is like it's like for me one step of three. It's like all of the theory and getting you inspired, taking you out and seeing something, and then that'll be a bigger conversation. So everyone's voice probably get heard, as opposed to the webinar where it's a little bit more restricted. And then we're hoping you move into the tree marking training as well. So thanks for your patience with that. I'll stop sharing and hand over to Ted. Thanks, Ted.
Okay, thank you, Lochlan. Am I unmuted? And everyone can hear me. That's fantastic. Okay, the next thing I have to do is share screens. Is the presentation now visible?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, ready to go. Okay, thank you, Lochlan. That was a brilliant introduction. And thanks for putting this together, bringing everyone together for this. CCF is a work in progress. We're all here to share knowledge, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and all the other elements and the contributions of my team here on the webinar. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about some of the work I've been doing over the last few years. I should acknowledge some of my key supporters in my own work at the moment, which is Professor Anya Devan and Ian Short, who are based in Dublin. And some of the examples in the presentation come from the work I've been doing in Ireland, where there is a similar movement to what we're seeing happening here in relation to CCF. And if I've got time, I'll flash up a full acknowledgement at the end of the presentation because there's too many people to thank individually. So I'm just going to rattle through the slides, hopefully not too fast and hopefully not too slow, so we keep to time. And I'll answer questions in the Q&A after we get through this. My remit that Lochlan's given me is to talk mostly from theory into practice. So I'm going to do some definitions and background and overview, and hopefully highlight some of the key terms that are now common language with CCF. So let's get going. Is that fine with you, Lochlan? Good. Right. So here's just a quick outline of the talk. I want to set the scene very briefly. Chris will say more about this in the second presentation, but I think we need to set the scene with what are the policy drivers at the high level in terms of UK forestry at the present time, which helps to explain why we are so interested in CCF. Then what is CCF? Continuous Cover Forestry. Again, quite high level, what are the guiding principles? Because we need that to then establish the theory and then move on into the practice. And the key term in our discussion is stand transformation. And that is the pathway from the forest that we have today in our part of the world to CCF woodlands in the future. And then I'll go through some steps in stand transformation, and the key word there is crown thinning, which is a little bit different from the standard thinning that most folks will be aware of in forestry at the present time in the UK forestry sector, which is mostly either intermediate or low thinning. Then hopefully some take-home messages at the end. Okay, so high-level policy drivers for UK forestry, why I think, and that I think are relevant for our discussion about CCF. First of all, the need to increase ecological resilience. I won't go into too much detail. I think everybody who's on this call will be aware that we are facing a climate change and environmental crisis, and that policy internationally now is directed towards increasing the resilience of our economy, resilience of our communities, and the resilience of our natural systems. And as foresters, we're most concerned with ecological resilience of the forests. That's in response to climate change and critically in our part of the world, the threats from introduced pests and diseases. And together, these represent an unknown, an uncertainty about the future, and we are having to address this by increasing ecological resilience. The second thing that I think is most important is that the underlying principle of sustainable forestry enshrined in the UK Forestry Standard and the UKWS is the concept of multifunctional forest management, and that is that we are managing forests for people, nature, and the economy. And so in very few, if any, woodlands now, we are single purpose. We need to balance multiple functions to deliver ecosystem services across a wide range of forest values. And third, I don't think we can forget the importance of timber production, and related to that, the quality of the timber that we're producing. As everybody knows, we produce about 20% of our timber requirements. We are one of the biggest importers of timber. We have a massive international impact through our demand for wood, and it is a moral and also, I would say, an economic opportunity for us to grow more timber of the right quality here at home. So we have a sustained need to focus on timber production and quality within these multifunctional resilient woods. The strategy to deliver this, which I think is also well embedded in policy at the present time, is to increase the species and structural diversity of our woodlands at the stand and landscape scales. And I just want to quickly acknowledge a paper that came out 2 days ago. Lead author Andrew Leslie, who's now with the Forest Research. And thanks, Andrew, for all the hard work you did on this paper, which I think is worth reading on the topic of resilience and robustness, and it sets some of what I've just talked about in context. So what that means, the forestry of the future has to, first of all, we're all aware we have to increase forest area. We also want to increase species diversity, and critically, where I think CCF is most important, is we want to increase the structural diversity of the forest as well. Okay, so that's where I see policy in UK forestry context on one slide, and Chris will say more, I'm sure, later on. So what is CCF? For those who are familiar with it, you will know the 1999 paper by Bill Mason and colleagues from Forest Research. This is the kind of defining paper titled What is Continuous Cover Forestry? And there's a lovely definition there. It's the use of silvicultural systems whereby the forest canopy is maintained at one or more levels without clear felling. Anya Nidavan in Dublin wrote a paper following that with this got the Irish take on things, and there's a key point in this that's important. Anya says it's the a management option which can be covers maintained continuously. The soil is never exposed and clear felling is avoided. And that key phrase there, soil is never exposed, is increasingly recognized as being one of the major advantages of the continuous cover forestry system, because we've latched onto the fact that so much of the carbon in our ecosystems is in the soil, and by reducing disturbance of the soils, we're actually able to capture and store more carbon below ground. And some of the papers say that more than 50% of the carbon in forest ecosystems is actually below ground, so it's very, very important. Another point to note as we get into this is that CCF is not one particular silvicultural system per se. It can be implemented using various silvicultural systems, so long as they don't involve clear felling. And we'll get into that a little bit more. The guiding principles are also well enshrined now in the literature, and I've summarized these as 4 points. We need to manage the forest ecosystem so that we're not managing just a crop of trees, we're managing the whole assemblage of plants and the soil, the water resources, all of the elements that contribute to a functioning forest ecosystem. And so, of course, that makes things more complex and sometimes more challenging. We use, wherever possible, natural processes. the most obvious natural process is working with natural regeneration and promoting natural regeneration, but it's also understanding the dynamics and relationships between one tree and the next, its shade tolerance, its ecological requirements, etc., etc. And in fact, the use of natural processes is one of the major opportunities, because we can also save money in restocking if we understand and correctly apply the processes to get functioning natural regeneration. We work within site limitations, and so site assessment is a key consideration. Without saying too much more, because I think this will come up on the field day. And through our understanding of silviculture, ecology, and the processes going on, we aim to diversify the structure of the stand, so we have got a continuous process of production and regeneration taking place at the same time. And this is also known as close to nature forestry. And in the European literature, they tend to use that term, close to nature forestry, and recently it's become closer to nature forestry, whereas we are using the term continuous cover forestry. It's slightly just different traditions and origins of the terminology. It can be applied on mixed broadleaf conifer forests, and there's already a community of people working to promote CCF. Pro-Silva Europe is the sort of umbrella organization across Europe, working in 25 countries now, with several thousand foresters as members and woodland owners and practitioners. Continuous Cover Forestry Group's well known in the UK, and in Ireland is our sister organisation, Pro-Silva Ireland. All of these groups are very active, and from our Cumbria Woodlands event, you can progress on to engage with these organisations. Very interesting people and activities in this community, in this space. So there is a European context, as I've just suggested, and in some countries, the tradition of continuous cover forestry is much more embedded than it is in our part of the world. Practically every forestry student early in their career was taken by their lecturer or professor to Germany, and we were indoctrinated with German silvicultural systems, but we also, I think, in nearly all of every case, acquired a passion for silviculture and a passion for what's possible in continuous cover forests. And when we go to the Black Forest and places like that, we see these outstanding examples where the science and the practice all work together in a sustainable way to produce all these many things that forest can give for people, nature, and the economy. So there's a deep tradition in Europe, and our tradition is a little bit younger, and we recognize there's some barriers that we need to overcome. These were written about in a recent paper by Bill Mason, published 2022. It's available from the Forestry Journal. And just to highlight three of the key ones that are relevant here, the current forest structure and condition of our woodlands is not entirely suitable for the immediate adoption of CCF. So that's why we need to talk about transforming our forests. And that's underpinned by our reliance on the rotational forest management systems, which is basically where we've been heavily reliant through our forest history and the way our forest policy has developed up till now on the clear fell system. But 80% of our productive forest, or maybe more, is managed on rotational forest management system, which in a way reps one lack of diversity in terms of the structure of the forest that we're working with. And then finally, the other key point is that we recognize that there's a lack of experience and training, and actually confidence among forestry professionals, practitioners, and woodland owners. And we've got to address that. And that's where training and knowledge exchange and a community becomes very, very important. Right. However, in Cumbria, we are well placed. We have some wonderful examples of CCF already in practice, and this gives us a tremendous opportunity to learn. We've got reference stands we can use. This is just one example at Dodwood in Cumbria, and there are many professionals already engaged, so we have a community, and that's the great foundation to go forward. I just mentioned two individuals, one in the public sector, Gareth Browning, who's been working away for decades now in West Cumbria, and Ian Jack, who I think of as the guru of thinning in the northwest of England, in the private sector at Lowther Estate, who has done tremendous work in the field of silviculture, but focusing around his thinning policy. So just to put a little bit of theory into practice, the classic definition of a forest development is the Oliver and Larson model that shows 4 stages in woodland management, from stand initiation through to the gap dynamic phase. And if you leave a forest to its own devices, it generally follows something like this pattern: stand initiation after disturbance, through stem exclusion, where the trees grow up, the crowns close, start to compete, but they limit light, prevent light reaching the forest floor. Eventually, the crown starts to break up through gaps created by natural disturbances. You start to get regeneration, and that process then develops into the gap dynamic phase, where you have mature trees and regeneration and multiple species all in the one stand. And the idea of CCF is to take that natural process and structure it and organize it in a way so that we can achieve the objectives we want from forest management. So basically, rotational forest management involves the stand initiation, stem exclusion phase, and then we clear fell and we reset. So we miss out these later stages of forest development. And continuous cover forestry is all about getting to a gap dynamic phase in forest structural development. And to get there, we have to manage the process through the stem exclusion and understory reinitiation phase, and that's where transformation comes in. If we start that process early, for example, from first thinning, it becomes an early transformation. If we leave it till later, it's a late transformation. So rotational forest management generally works in stands in the stand initiation, stem exclusion phases. Continuous cover forestry leads through the early or late transformation to irregular stands, analogous to the gap dynamic phase. And so this is what everybody thinks of CCF. I hope everybody out there agrees with this. Beautiful forest, big valuable trees, diverse species, and a range of age classes, a light coming through the forest floor, something that we can relate to on a social and a human scale, and for foresters in terms of production and the dynamics. So there's a wonderful quote from Gifford Pinchot, the founder of the US Forest Service, and he had a dream, actually quite similar to Lochlan's dream, that he wanted to develop forests where we could harvest timber and preserve the forest at one and the same time. However, we cannot just get there in one step. We live in a windy environment. We have disturbance and natural process to take into account. So where do we start? Well, this paper from 1961 by J.B. MacDonald, who was Conservator of Forests for South Scotland, was an aficionado when it comes to thinning, and he wrote this wonderful paper. It was actually a lecture, and he said, thinning, it must be acknowledged, is the most vital operation whereby foresters can mold their woods and even transform mere plantations into forest. It's the very basis of silvicultural art. Okay, so we're talking about a process, a pathway that starts quite early in the stand's development and leads to a diverse, multi-species and complex structure woodland. And that is done through stand transformation. The key paper for this is the Schutz paper from 2001. And there were a series of papers that Jean-Philippe Schutz published, well worth reading. And I've taken this diagram from that book. It is actually quite structured in its approach. The first stage is differentiation, where you focus to promote the valuable elements. So you've got a stand in the stem exclusion phase. How can we introduce diversity? This is where thinning is introduced, but in a way that we get structural diversity actually at the canopy level and in the spatial arrangement of the trees. And that leads to a sort of more gappy arrangement to the trees over time, where light can penetrate the forest floor and allow for natural regeneration. And then we've got structural development, where we focus on these regenerating groups to allow them to come through the forest and develop into the canopy. And then finally, we achieve our structure that we're desired, which is our transformed multi-species forest, where regeneration and harvest and ingrowth from one size class to the next is all taking place at the same time. So the key metric that I think is important for all of us to remember and helps guide our understanding and the management is basal area. And in case some participants are not so familiar with this term and the concept, just defining basal area is the cross-sectional area of a tree at breast height, 1.3 meters. And when you add up the basal areas for all the individual trees in your stand, you get a basal area per hectare value. And that is important for CCF management decision making. It relates both to the stand density and the development of the stand, but also has a link to the biology of the stand in terms of such things as the requirements for light and the natural regeneration potential of the forest. So it's a very, very useful metric that we use in CCF. Now, this is potentially a little bit complex, but this is really just why thinning is a pathway to stand transformation. So what they've got here is a graph that I've made up. It's conceptual, it's not real, but it is based on experience. So we've got basal area on the y-axis, we've got age on the x-axis, and we have a typical case study here is a spruce stand that's planted, and it grows for a few years before it gets to above 1.3 meters, and we start to register basal area. We've got rapid growth as the canopies start to close. And typically, when the grant runs out at 15 years, as soon as possible after that, we want to start making money from that stand through commercial thinning. And so I've marked the threshold for commercial thinning is usually about 15 years. And then we come in after that, depending on the site, and we start our thinning interventions. So the thinning interventions create this sawtooth because you remove some basal area, so trees and basal area, and then you get ingrowth, so there's a growth response, and you repeat that process. Now, in clear felling systems or rotational forest management, we might do 2 or 3 thinnings, and we would clear fell a forest. But in CCF, we continue thinning, and we thin actually onwards until the basal area is down into the range where our target species are going to regenerate. And we know for example, in a simple system, Sitka spruce will regenerate in a basal area range of 25 to 35 square meters per hectare. And eventually that ingrowth comes through and replaces the trees that were originally planted. And all the time we're moving towards this irregular structure. And it's possible because we get seed production coming into the stand. In this case, we're seeing seed production around 30 years. And so once you've got the basal area down and you've got seed production and you've got control of the ground conditions, you can start to think about taking the forest forward towards an irregular structure. Right. Silviculture.
Just to jump in, this isn't a critical warning, but you've passed 20 minutes there.
Oh,
so we should sort of start thinking about 5 minutes now, if that's okay.
Talking too slowly, yes. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, just shivving me on. I knew this would happen. Okay, so the silvicultural objectives then are: we want to sustain timber production. We need to promote timber quality, because by promoting timber quality, we get value from the forest, and there's no point investing energy in all of the silviculture without having a good economic return. So we sustain timber production, promote quality at every opportunity. We want to transform the structure, which is controlled through our understanding of basal area. And in the process, we want to increase the anchorage and stability of the stand. And here we use a metric called height diameter ratio, with the key range being 60 to 80. So that's the height in meters divided by the diameter in centimeters, something you can measure very, very easily. And the optimum range is 60 to 80, where we've got stability and stem quality, not too much taper. And of course, all the time, because we're managing for people, nature, and the economy, we identify and retain habitat and biodiversity attributes as we go forward. So this is just the idea that thinning allows us to develop stability, and we're all about having a proportion of trees that are independently stable in that range, 60 to 80, 60 to 70 being optimum. And that's distinctly different from a stand where thinning hasn't happened or the spacing's too tight, and the trees are socially stable. And if we don't start thinning early enough and we delay it, as everybody knows, you miss the window of opportunity, and the stand eventually would have to be clear felled because we can't manage for the transformation. So we do this by crown thinning, and I will pick up most of this in the field. This is going to be a key focus of our field day. The key feature of crown thinning is that we make 2 decisions: a positive decision to retain the best individual trees, and a negative selection decision where we mark the trees that are competing with those best trees and any other ones that are particularly poor quality, so that we are focusing our energy on the best individual trees. So there's a positive selection and a negative selection, which is shown here by green dots on this plot and red dots for the ones that we're removing. And that's how that works in practice. Here we've got a good quality tree and its neighbour is judged to be less good quality. It's competing with the crown and the space that the good tree occupies, so we want to remove that tree in our thinning operation. And all the time we're thinking about how that benefits the development of the tree's crown. So here we have a broadleaf tree that's been halo thinned, so it's a nicely balanced crown, and that's putting increment and favouring a tree that's got potential high value in the future. And the pattern of this then becomes somewhat irregular. Here the trees of the white bands. This is in one of our research sites in Ireland. And that's what drives the regularity of the pattern of trees in the stand, releasing these trees using this neighbourhood concept of taking competitors away from the best quality trees. And I'll skip over this diagram, sorry, Lochlan, it's a little difficult to go into, but we can do this in a very programmed way. Here we see the trees in the stand, and the red are the ones that we're marking to remove. You can see they're always associated, nearly always associated with the best quality trees, giving them more space. And the result of that is the good trees are released from competition in a careful way, and gaps are created, which will eventually be where the natural regeneration comes into the stand. In terms of production, one of the big advantages of the crown thinning approach shown here is, just very quickly, similar production over 3 thinnings. That's the key point here. It's about 200 cubic meters, and this is from our study site in Ireland. But in terms of product classes, because we're favouring these competitor trees and removing them in the early phases of the transformation process, there is an economic gain because we're removing larger dimension trees. And in our study, we found 32% saw logs coming out in the crown thinning relative to the low thinning, where you're taking out smaller dimension trees. So there's actually an early financial win from initiating the transformation process. And I'll skip over the implications of that. The driver of, by selecting the good quality trees, what we end up with is this sort of gappy arrangement where you can see there's shaded parts of the stand, which is the dark blue, and lighter patches of the stand, which are the pale colors, the oranges. And that irregularity represents small windows where the regeneration can start, but not in a uniform way, in an irregular way. And so what we find is small patches of regeneration eventually come into these lighter areas. We work with that regeneration by focusing our thinning to expand the gaps. And over time, after several thinnings, you start to see regeneration coming through and developing into these more individual stems, which then spreads through the forest and gives us an irregular understory as the thinning progresses. Okay, this is for the rest of the workshop and the session. How do we do all of that? The key skill is tree marking, and without saying too much more, courses will follow. And that rush through the theory will be made very clear by actually doing this in practice. It's a lot of fun, it's very interesting, and very fulfilling to come to grips with this whole ecological and dynamic process. Right, finishing off, a little over time, I apologise, Lochlan. So getting started in wood in CCF, as I said, to be developed in the field day. We need to identify suitable sites. We'll pick that one up in the field. We need to use inventory data to inform decisions. So that's basal area, and some basic metrics about the stand, height diameter ratios, for example. We need to thin the forest in a regular cycle. That's where crown thinning comes in for production, quality, structure, and stability. We always want to promote quality attributes because that's economic return from the woodland. We learn by doing, we adapt to changing conditions, and we maintain a regular schedule of active management. That's key. We allow time for the stand to respond and for natural regeneration to come in. We engage with the wider community of practitioners in training, and we share experience. And the last thing I want to say is that to get started in woodland in CCF, We want to embrace the challenge and the many opportunities that lie ahead, I think, for UK forestry with CCF. So thanks very much. Apologies for going over time.
Thank you, Ted. I absolutely love that presentation. We should have thought about it and just given you an hour, as far as I'm concerned. So, because we've lost a little bit of time, can we go just straight on to you, Chris? Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem, Loch. I'll just share my screen, and if you can.
Ted, can you? Oh, that's good, Chris. You've taken over. Great.
No worries. If you can just tell me when I'm showing it as a presentation.
Yeah, you're on.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much, Loch. Right. Good evening, everybody.
Just a quick note, Chris.
Yep.
Sorry. Oh, there you go. I was going to say your voice is a little quiet, but you sorted it out.
It's all right. Yeah, I've just realised I was drinking my cup of tea before and I had my microphone up. There we go. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Nice to be here. And thanks to Ted for a great presentation. I think hopefully you'll see the synergies between what Ted's been talking about, what I'm about to talk about, and certainly the policy case that Ted's laid out very much underpins what I'm just about to discuss. Before I go any further, the other thing I would just like to point out, and I'm conscious there's one or two people on the call who aren't in England, and obviously the role of CCF and the principles we're talking about here are applicable across the board. As I work for Forestry Commission England, and my remit stops at the boundaries of England, necessarily my presentation is sort of focused on the England context. So some of the figures and some of the numbers I talk about and the policy documents that I'm referring to are England specific, but it's not to say that they're in any way out of kilter with what's happening elsewhere in the UK or indeed internationally. So before I wanted to go on to talking about the sort of some of the policy areas and what we're doing and how we're supporting CCF and where CCF fits into policy, I just wanted to take a step back a little bit and just think at a national level what the resource looks like in England. And this diagram here, taken from the Keepers of Time document, I think is a useful breakdown of understanding what our resource looks like and what some of the perhaps the key features of it are. I think the first thing that stands out, obviously, from an England perspective, is how much of our woodland is actually is broadleaf woodland. Obviously, we still have a not insignificant conifer component, but if you compared that to somewhere like Scotland, that would be a slightly different figure. So broadleaf woodland is particularly important in England, but also within those categories that we've got in there, we've got ancient semi-natural woodland, which is our ancient woodlands, those woodlands that have been continuously wooded since 1600. And as a result of which have got sort of particular interest from a biodiversity perspective and largely, contrary to what most people sort of think about when they think about woodlands, largely associated with the soil mycorrhizae, the soil conditions and the ground flora, those things which aren't easy to replace and are really important to protect. The trees themselves, there won't be many in those woodlands that are that old, but it's that soil and the ground flora that's really, really important. And then we've also got our plantations and ancient woodland sites, pause woodlands, so about 13% of the resource. So that's largely conifer on what was ancient woodland sites, so usually non-native conifers planted onto ancient woodland sites, but not exclusively. That can be broadleaf plantations that have been superimposed onto ancient woodland sites, perhaps with species that would differ from the natural MVC type, etc. So we've got a range of woodland types there, and some of which clearly from a sort of a biodiversity, ecological point of view, perhaps have more interest than others, and that obviously will inform our thinking in terms of policy. And just to break those figures down a little bit, I just wanted to kind of flag what the species breakdown looks like. With the conifers, primarily because we basically, apart from Scots pine and one or two minor conifers, we don't have any significant native productive species. Most of the conifers that we have planted of any significant proportion have been planted for timber production, and they tend to be non-native species. Okay, and we've as you look at that chart there, whilst we have a decent mix within England, in fairness, the challenge we've got is that there aren't that many species there that we're reliant upon. And when you get things like Dothostroma that are impacting certain pine species, we've got Phytophthora in larch and things like that. You know, the number you're looking at and how many areas we can use these species in starts to reduce further. In terms of the broadleaf species, that's dominated by native species or near-native species such as sycamore, naturalized species such as sycamore. But again, you'll see there's an imbalance perhaps in that species distribution. Thinking about species such as oak and ash and beech and sycamore having quite a high presence there. Certainly with oak and ash and beech, that's largely driven by not just NVC type, but historical management, where those species, especially oak, were our timber species of the past. They were planted for timber production and have a significant position within the woodland resource. And as I say, for England, we're looking about 68% broadleaf and 32% conifer. So it's just worth bearing in mind that makeup of the woodlands that we've got and what that might mean for some of the challenges that we're seeing across the country. And those woodlands that are made up of those component parts, those woodlands deliver a hell of a lot for society. And coming from a government point of view, what we really talk about is natural capital and ecosystem services. So what we're trying to talk about is all those values that the woodlands and treescape provide for us. And we try to recognise the relative value of those things. Some are, obviously traditional market values such as wood processing, wood production, but some of them are less tangible but nonetheless valuable, such as biodiversity, the social values and access and things like that, and the benefits for health, air pollution absorption, water filtration, carbon sequestration. Some of these we're getting better at monetizing and attracting market value to. But nonetheless, there's a range of values there which are really, really important. And the figures that we've got here, which are taken from the 2018 Tree Health Resilience Strategy, they're talking about an asset value of about 175 billion. So that's the natural capital value of the woodlands. And through ecosystem services and what it generates, we're talking an annual value of about 4.9 billion. So whilst economically from wood processing and traditional forestry, we're looking at somewhere between 1 and 2 billion in terms of annual value to the UK economy, we're looking at a wider value of nearly 5 billion from all those other ecosystem services combined. So you can see within that whilst timber is obviously really important, there's a significant range of other values that we're trying to address and deal with and protect within our English woodlands. And those woodlands face a series of challenges. I don't think anyone would be surprised with what I've got on this chart, and I've just tried to summarize at quite a high level what those challenges sort of look like. And the one that I always start with, if I'm honest with you, because it's quite stark and it's something that I think most people now are probably having to deal with on a daily basis. If you work in woodlands or woodland management, I think it's got to the point now where it's almost unavoidable that you'll be dealing with pests and diseases in some form. And this graph in the top left here, which just shows the significant uptick in major tree pest introductions to the UK since 1900. Obviously, a lot of that is associated with trade and movement of goods and global trade. There's no getting away from that. But there's other things in there as well which contribute to this, which come on to things like climate, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So pest and disease burden on our woodlands is significant. Most of our tree species have got something that could probably affect them in some way. Some of these pests and diseases are relatively minor. Some of them, like ash dieback, Phytophthora ramorum, are significant, and there's one or two sat on the wings waiting to cause problems if we let them, such as Ips typographus, where we're looking at potential real problems if those things get out of hand. So we've got to have that in the back of our mind all the time. What are the threats to our woodlands? These threats from pests and diseases are increasing. It's unlikely to change that situation in the short term. There's a lot of work going on to try and reduce that burden, but nonetheless, pests and diseases are part of our future. In combination with that, we've got climate change, and climate change really does add to the challenges that we've got, because what climate change essentially does is it brings us conditions which potentially stress our trees, whether that be through droughts, extreme periods of wet ground, or even significant storm events where we've got major wind events and then we get damaged and snapped trees. And in all of these situations, what we're doing in combination with a gradually warming climate and changing climate, which is more amenable to a range of more international pests, what we're starting to see is sort of a perfect storm where we've got stressed trees in a climate which is more amenable to a wider range of pests and diseases and an increased pest and disease burden, able to take advantage of stressed trees. So we've got this sort of perfect storm brewing. And again, I'm not going to go into the mechanics of climate change and what is and isn't happening, but I think in essence, the climate is changing, the weather patterns are changing, and these are the results that we're seeing of it. So we need to take those things into account. We also need to think about biodiversity. We've got a significant biodiversity decline, and for want of a better phrase, I don't like using the word crisis, but it is significant challenges that we're seeing in the face of biodiversity, significant biodiversity decline. I think something like 19% decline in abundance of species since the 1970s. And the graph I've got in here is just focused on woodland bird species, so woodland specialist birds, and the decline in species abundance over the last, since the 1970s. Those challenges are across the board. It's not just a woodland issue; it's a environment at large issue, and there's a number of contributing factors to that. But interestingly, in woodlands, one of the things we've got in woodlands, which perhaps is less of an issue or is perhaps more associated with changes in land use, but in woodlands, one of the things we've got is that we've had a lack of management, or at least a lack of traditional management in a lot of our woodlands. Obviously, we moved towards conifer being our predominant timber source of wood, should I say, and timber production. And since sort of the 1970s, we've seen a gradual decline in traditional broadleaf woodland management. Currently, we sat at somewhere around about 41% of our privately owned woodlands are not in management, or at least not in management to an extent that would require like a felling license or a management plan, so not any management of scale. And that brings with it a number of challenges. A lot of our native woodlands traditionally have been managed on coppice cycles or with regular gap opening through felling. And that creates a rotation, and that creates opportunities for a range of different habitat types to exist and to move around in woodlands, which favours a lot of our woodland specialist species. And that decline in management, combined with a number of other challenges such as deer pressure and grey squirrel pressure, has really compounded any issues around biodiversity at large. So actually, ironically, one of the things that we're really keen to do with woodlands is actually see more management, because that has direct benefits for biodiversity. So that's kind of the situation we're facing ourselves in, that perfect storm of we've got a lack of management. One other point I'll just say on lack of management while it's in my head, in case I forget to mention it later. One of the challenges we have with lack of management as well is that when we get these pest and disease outbreaks that we're talking about, or when we see in trees that are becoming stressed, because we're not necessarily got all our woodlands under somebody's eye, somebody looking at the woodlands and understanding what's happening, some of these pests and diseases and challenges can go unnoticed for quite a significant period of time, which can create a significant problem when eventually a pest or a disease gets established to a level where it can really have an impact. So again, that engagement with woodlands is crucial there. So that's the kind of backdrop. That's the resource we're talking about. That's the challenges that we're facing. And needless to say, whilst woodlands is what we're talking about today, those challenges exist across the board, across the landscape. So there's a number of policy documents generated by government which are underpinning the sort of approach that we take towards woodland management and the types of interventions we want to see. The England Tree Action Plan is a particularly busy document in terms of things that we're doing. And I've put that front and centre, if I'm honest with you, because there's a couple of pieces of work that I've been directly involved with off the back of this, and which speak directly to this idea of CCF. So CCF and low impact silvicultural systems gets a specific mention in England Trees Action Plan as a key means of delivering improved ecological condition and resilience in our woodlands, to deliver against biodiversity, to deliver against timber, and to deliver against water, carbon, etc. That role of CCF and LIS in our woodlands, bearing in mind the type of woodlands that we've got in England and the nature of them, that gets a specific mention and underpins the approach that we want to take towards woodland management, which is underpinned by ecological condition, improving ecological condition. So not only are we trying to improve ecological condition, The strategy also makes a really strong case for a need to make better use of timber in this country and our wood products, and to try and use more timber in construction and more UK grown, English grown timber in construction. And some of you will be aware of the timber in construction roadmap that's recently been announced, which is basically a plan outlined by government with a number of stakeholders and partners supporting, to see greater use of UK grown woodland, supplying timber into timber in construction, and to try and develop a UK, not in the UK, sorry, at an England level, a great use of timber in construction with all the carbon benefits, etc., that brings. So there's a real common theme there. We want to see more woodland management to improve ecological condition, but also to bring timber in line. That underpins a lot of what we're doing. The Environment Improvement Plan, which was released last year, a few key points out of that really are sort of the impact that has, is that whilst obviously the England Trees Action Plan is looking at improving ecological condition, the Environment Improvement Plan actually makes some statutory announcements around protecting biodiversity and making sure that we don't have a loss in species abundance. So it's absolutely like clear cut that we do not want to see any further reduction in species abundance or risk of extinction. So that puts a lot of pressure on the resource we've got to make sure that it doesn't go backwards and that it starts to deliver to a greater level for biodiversity and for the environment. Another couple of key documents which relate to those pieces of work but predate them to some degree. So the Tree Health Resilience Strategy, that was published in 2018, and again it underpins an approach to woodland resilience. So thinking about resilience in the whole, but which is underpinned by good ecological condition, which composes of structural and species diversity, and genetic diversity. And the genetic diversity piece is really strong in the Tree Health Resilience Strategy, and part of the reason for that is that the means through which we can get our tree species to adapt to the climate and to adapt to pests and diseases and demonstrate the ability to adapt to those, it comes through genetic diversity. There's a number of different ways of achieving that, whether that be through planting or whether that be through natural regeneration. But that genetic turnover and that need for regeneration within our woodlands is really strong in that document, and that underpins a lot of our thinking. That document is currently under the process of being reviewed, and we are producing a new document which will become the Tree and Woodland Resilience Strategy. That's underway. That work's underway at the minute. So hopefully in the sort of next 12 months or so, we'll see that renewed document come out, and it will really sort of lay out a blueprint for how we push on with woodland management and improve resilience in the coming years. So watch that space, that'll be coming up. And then the other one, if we go back to that first slide that I showed, which showed the
just jump in there for 2 seconds, Chris, just to give you your amber one, if that's all right. We've got sort of 2-3 minutes to wrap up. Thanks.
Yeah, we're most of our way there. So another document which will have a significant impact on a lot of woodland managers, especially in the southeast or the south of England, is Keepers of Time, our approach to ancient and native woodland, and that's recognising those woodlands that we flagged right at the start there, that component of our national resource, which is either ancient semi-natural woodland or plantation and ancient woodland site woodland. Again, that's an approach which in essence we say that we're going to improve and protect our ancient semi-natural woodlands, and that we're going to restore our plantations on ancient woodland sites. So again, you can see there's a direction of travel there. And one of the things we want to see in any of that kind of management is sensitive low impact management, which protects those soils and the ground flora. So what we're trying to achieve, what's all that policy actually trying to achieve? Well, we want more resilient woodlands that are better able to resist and recover from disturbances, and to support a more resilient landscape. So thinking about all those other benefits that trees provide in the landscape, including water filtration, etc. We want to see improved ecological condition and no net loss of biodiversity and abundance. So we want to see an upward trend in terms of ecology and biodiversity. We want to see a sustainable supply of timber and wood products. There might be changes in what that looks like depending on what resource we're bringing into line, but basically, yeah, that sustainable supply of timber and wood products is crucial. And then we also want to see pause restoration and sensitive management of ancient semi-natural woodlands and SSSI. We're really interested in carbon sequestration, in trying to achieve our net zero ambitions. But a part of that carbon sequestration is also the protection of that resource, of that carbon. So that includes soil carbon. And also what we don't want to be doing is having lots and lots of trees that are dying as a result of pests and diseases, drought, whatever, which are then just releasing that carbon back out into the atmosphere again. We want to protect that resource so it can sequester carbon as efficiently as possible. We want improved public access and engagement with woodlands. And in general, to help deliver all this, we want to see higher levels of woodland management. Where does CCF fit in? Well, essentially, it's potentially very, very resilient. There's a lot of flexibility in CCF systems, which are better able to adapt and change and be more flexible as disturbances come along. And one example I would just like to give is where on the continent they're dealing with this type of graphis at scale, where they kind of have a lot of routine management, which is able to sort of live with the disease or live with the pest, should I say, is where they've got well-thinned Norway spruce woodlands. They survey them every year, they identify the infected trees, they go through, they remove the infected trees perhaps once or twice a year, and that keeps the pest burden low and stops any major outbreaks. That's only possible because their woodlands are managed through essentially a CCF system whereby they've got regular thinning and stand stability. CCF introduces a greater range of structural and species diversity, but potentially species diversity. I won't go into detail on that, but it has the potential to increase a greater range of species diversity and certainly greater opportunities for some of these more lesser used species and opportunities to create opportunities to use a wider range of species which might be more shade tolerant, might be a little bit more might suffer a little bit more from exposure if we try to establish them on clear fell sites. So it gives us opportunities for species diversity that might not be there with a clear fell. And the structural diversity obviously is fantastic for biodiversity. Regular interventions are a key component of this, and regular interventions mean that we can actually get in there, and if a pest or disease breaks out, we're well set to be able to get in and respond to that in a way that perhaps if our woodlands weren't managed and we weren't used to going into there and having stable stands, we might struggle to do. It's low impact, it protects the soils, and it delivers all those benefits we've got in terms of soil carbon and biodiversity. And crucially, this plays back to the multifunctional point that Ted was talking about, what CCF does allow us to do is it allows us to combine timber biodiversity and social benefits in a relatively compact area and deliver against all of those outcomes. Perhaps not optimum for everything, but it allows us to deliver all those things, which in a lot of situations in England is frankly what we're after. And then to summarise, basically, how are we supporting this? How do we support this work for CCF and broader resilient woodland management? Well, we're improving woodland management grants. There's work underway on that, and I'm sure you've all seen announcements and things like that around what grants are coming. But in a nutshell, the grants will help to support this kind of management. We're looking at sector skills support, so we've already done a lot around sector capacity and developing things such as the Forestry and Arboriculture Training Fund. We've got our apprenticeships, level 3, level 3, and level 5 and 6 degree apprenticeships, trying to bring that new skill set into the sector, a higher level of competency. And then there's also support through the NCF funds and one or two others for third-party training provision. And all of that work will continue to go into the future, and we'll build and refine how we provide that support. Obviously, guidance and decision support information is really important. There's some stuff that's been done fairly recently, so things like forest development types. I'm thinking about the Forest Research's continuous cover transformation guides and things like that. But there's a lot of work also going on to update and review those pieces of guidance as well and produce new guidance where necessary. There's constant underway research and development to inform best practice and to learn from what works and what doesn't work and to inform our guidance. And that takes up a significant portion of resource and time. And then finally, this is a shameless plug for something that I'm working on. We will have the new tree and woodland resilience strategy, which really hopefully will lay a blueprint for how all these things come together in a coordinated fashion and demonstrate how, alongside a whole range of other silvicultural approaches and systems, depending on objectives and outputs, CCF fits into that delivery plan for more resilient, biodiverse, ecologically functioning woodlands. Thanks, Loch. Sorry that we've run over a little bit.
Nice one. No, thanks very much. I've run over, Ted's run over, you've run over, we've all run over. it's accumulated to a bit of a lost time. So that was fantastic, both of you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've got an applause emoji. Good use of the Teams emoji. Could you stop sharing, Chris?
I have. I think that should be done. Yeah.
Amazing. So the scientists are saying, yeah, let's do it. It's possible. The government is saying, we want you to do it. Dave, I want to ask you a question, if that's okay. And I've been trying to think about what it is, and it was around like, well, is the wind risk too great with these things? Where are the markets? I didn't know what to ask you, but really what I want to ask you is, so, given that it's possible and the government wants us to do it, why aren't we doing more of it in the private sector?
Well, I'll start by saying, if I was just looking at that, I made a note that there was 69% of all woodland in England is broadleaf, and by my reckoning, all of that's managed as continuous cover forestry. So why do we need to do any more? That's more than meeting my UKFS commitments. And I think the reality is on most larger wooded estates, there's going to be a significant proportion of woodland which is either unmanaged, inaccessible broadleaf woodland. There's going to be a relative amount which is perhaps is managed for landscape, or maybe that sort of plant collections, arboretums close to the big house. So it is there. So I was thinking, do I actually manage CCF? And my initial thing, well, no, I don't. And then you start thinking of it like that. You think, well, yes, there's plenty of that out there. So in many ways, I think for the private sector, you don't have to go and look and actually from your productive conifer resource, which is there to produce timber and income. So that's where I would start, is that, there is CCF there. And why do we really need to go out and sort of artificially manufacture any more? Because, to my mind, forestry is about, I use the word forestry particularly, is about generating income and managing the timber resources and investment. And I've yet to see the figures which prove to me that managing conifer woodlands as a CCF actually make money. And it's kind of scary to look at the amount of input you've just discussed today, especially sort of management input. Going and thinning every 3 to 4 years, that's cost. That means you're going to be intervening if you're going to intervene that often, you're going to be intervening when the market is suboptimal. That's cost. So all these things, all this management cost, substantial, all that marking, intervention, maintenance, cost. If you want to make money from forestry, you must keep costs down. It's the vital element of it. If you don't look after costs, it's gardening. So I love the look of it. There's room for it, but if it doesn't make money, and if you can't control the costs, it's just something pretty to look at. So that's where I come from, and I'm here to still be convinced, and I want to see the economics, because I think it's the vital part missing from all of this is there's no detailed analysis about how it can actually, what the costs are, what the returns are, and if it works. And once I see the figures for that, and if I can be convinced, I'm here to be enlightened.
So to summarize, and that's absolutely fantastic, thank you. That's like, how could you possibly sell that to a client when you haven't got,
Yes.
You haven't got anything to back you up? There's not enough resource, and what you're proposing is a very cost-heavy initial intervention with no confidence or experience in that actually making a financial return. Like this, it's quite easy to empathize with that. Who can make that recommendation with confidence? Yeah, I like that answer. Thank you. I don't know if anybody, like if either Ted or Chris or even anybody else for that matter wants to, is there a response to that out there? Doesn't necessarily have to be, but what do we do about all of these costs, and is it actually worth it, and where's the information that shows us that it is worth it? Chris, you've unmuted.
There we go. So I think, yeah, I mean, Dave's got some good points there, to be fair, and I think there's shades of as well in terms of if you think of the spectrum in terms of silvicultural systems, where you would end up with your pure selection systems at one end, and you sort of come back from that into sort of small group felling and etc., and start moving back towards the sort of what you would think of as the larger clear fell type approach. So the shades of in there which you can make work. And I think a lot of this then comes down to what the objectives of the landowner and what's going on in the woodland, the size of the woodlands. And I think one of the things that we have in England, which is Dave's already said, a lot of our broadleaf woodlands are kind of managed under what would be deemed to be like a CCF type basis. You've got those low level interventions, small interventions, probably go and take out half a dozen real nice timber trees and some firewood at the same time, and the combination of the two can make quite a nice thinning. I think in terms of management interventions, it's always going to be a challenge. I think with skilled operators and skilled contractors and a clear sort of approach to how you're doing things, I think these things are quite achievable. I think the challenge is when you get something which is overly complex and requires too much supervision and too much oversight, that can be a real challenge. So I think it is possible. I think in a lot of England's woodlands, it already kind of does happen. I think the challenge is getting it to happen in more woodlands, and also thinking about why we want it to happen in a lot of these woodlands. And a few of those components come back to that sort of that ability to have woodlands which have been managed and which have got somebody with oversight of them, so that if we have pest and disease outbreaks, we can kind of try and deal with it. We're managing landscape level challenges through things like deer and squirrel and things like that. So I think as well as something in there about why we're doing it and where that tips over into those other benefits we talked about woodlands, and why perhaps in some areas it probably does need some other kind of financial support to make it work, because there's going to be situations where actually we're trying to achieve some certain things here, but in pure economics there will be situations where that might not work. But it comes down to the individual's opportunities.
It's a good point. Thanks, Chris. I think I'm going to come back to that point about incentives and what we're going to do to put, I guess, pump prime or encourage or like offset some of these costs that are obviously in the way of us managing woodlands this way. But Mike, you put your hand up, so I just didn't like to invite you to contribute or ask a question. Are you there, Mike? Sorry, we had the question in the chat here, I think. One cost saving may be regeneration as opposed to the cost of restocking. Fair point. Another cost factor is that continuous cover forestry, you're focusing on the best timber and letting it grow during the time when it has a high growth rate. So over the timescale of a continuous forest, the cost argument may be a plus for CCF. Yes, certainly in some places it won't work. That's interesting. Kind of makes me think about, I mean, regeneration is definitely a saving, but that high value timber thing makes me think about markets, because all of my specific, like actually on the ground experience is clear fell and selling 40 to 50-year-old Sitka spruce, and that's a very, it's a bulk market with a low asking price, really, a low entry price, which that price doesn't allow you for all of the costs that you're talking about, Dave. So where are the markets for this other stuff that we might generate for CCF? You got a hand up to answer this, or another question, Dave? What's the
well, kind of to answer that sort of question. I mean, the main market in the UK for softwoods is obviously conifer sawlogs. That's the valuable market within a clear fell system, and with the exception of a few minor products, Douglas fir poles, very niche markets, high value but niche markets. And yet, you're looking at a crop which has to be grown for 80 years, 100 years, almost double the length of Sitka spruce, and it doesn't achieve double the value. I have to question the fact that if you're going to have very large dimension timber, we call oversized sawlogs, well, there's no premium on that. There's a cost, against an extra cost, you're getting less for that money. So it's a difficult thing. And maybe a question for Ted and the silviculturalist is, are we, if we're going to grow for conifers for 80 years, surely we are growing timber well beyond its sort of peak maximum mean annual increment. I think that's the term. We aren't actually growing at optimal growth rate. So we've got another issue there. And, continuous cover forestry has a place, but I think we need to be fairly honest about it's what it can do and the costs that's involved with it. So, I think, yeah, nice. But again, please convince me otherwise. I'm here maybe to just ask those questions.
Ted, do you want to come in, Ted?
Yes. Dave, you've really thrown down the gauntlet here. Yes, you're highlighting the common recently discussed issues with CCF. My experience is a little bit different, particularly in recent years. There are so many factors, and I've got to keep myself short. I don't think CCF is for everyone and for every site, but at the moment, there is opportunity for more. We have large areas of our woodland resource that are undermanaged, and we have many private woodland owners that own their woodland for not just the economic investment and the timber. They have a multifunctional profile in terms of the management objectives. And I think that, in my experience, certainly in my Irish experience, we're finding a growing number of people coming forward, sometimes very sound business people, seeing the opportunities from move from a major payback every 40 years as opposed to regular incomes on a more shorter term. So it comes down to the financial, economic profile and philosophy, and even the environmental ethic of the owners. And I think as foresters, what I see is that we are, to use the phrase, citizens with a toolbox. We want to be able to offer our clients, the woodland owners, society, a range of options, because ultimately, through all the research, we know we need to increase the diversity of the forest, and CCF is one of the best ways of achieving these multifunctional forests. So we have a toolbox of skills, which includes rotational forest management, and it includes CCF. And by the way, in terms of the cost thing, that is a major question. I'm going to defer to forest research and others, because that is a major thing that we have to do. There have been some studies. There have been one or two very good comparison studies, but mostly based on models that do weigh up the costs and benefits, but they're not as negative as you think, because there are some things that pay in CCF and some things that cost, some things that cost less, something that costs more. And the rotational forest management approach is not without significant costs and not without significant risks. So it's not a straightforward one versus the other at this point in time, especially based on what Chris was telling us about all of these pressures that are now upon the forest. And so I think we go with the people who want to do CCF. That will expand its application, and we help develop their skills, their knowledge, our own skills and knowledge, and that broadens the the third thing: species, forest structure, and also the skill base of the forester that can help implement these resilient strategies. But yes, I agree, we do need to be doing more research, and the economic aspect is critical. Yeah.
Thanks, Ted. I just want to bring grants back into the picture here, because obviously there's a gap between what we're doing and what we could be doing, and that can be helped by grants. Now, there's currently a few woodland management grants out there. We've got a basic WD1, which is 127 quid a hectare a year, and then we've got the commonly used add-ons for squirrel and deer. And Dave, I've probably got a question for you coming now, because you're the most familiar with hands-on use of these. So currently, if you these are stackable as well. So you stack those three options, you can get 292 quid a hectare, and that's 3 out of the 5 available stackable options. And that's per year for the 10-year grant. So, and we had an announcement in January that these grants aren't out, and we don't know anything more about them. But we've got a payment of 144 quid a hectare a year for managing native woodlands, including ancient semi-natural woodlands. We've got a payment for £202 per hectare per year for improved woodland resilience. And we've got a payment of £56 per hectare per year for managed woodlands for flood and drought mitigation. Like the questions that I have that I don't know the answers to, and I know nobody else knows the answers to, is, are these stackable? Can you get them every year for every hectare of your woodland? And what do you have to do for them? So if we take that 292 for deer and squirrels in the basic payment, and then we add resilience to it of £202, and we add the drought mitigation, and suddenly we're at £550 per hectare per year for 10 years, which is on a 100 hectare forest, which not everybody has, is 50 grand. So that's a significant amount. So Dave, my question is does that give us what we need to be able to manage some of these systems to like offset some of those costs, do you think?
It's without doubt a major driver again. I mean, we have been living on £100 a hectare for quite a long time and trying to do a lot with it. You know, generally, in 2 or 3 years ago, we were being asked to do squirrel control within that £100 a hectare. Deer management is something that generally you can largely do and make money and receive the grant. The £90 a hectare, you largely can see that almost as income. You probably ought to be not charging your stalker to come and actually stalk on your ground for that as well. And some of those other options are going to be stackable, although are quite specific, I understand. So they're not going to apply to a whole estate. You're going to be very, very lucky if you get them to apply to the whole estate. And they're a rate that really, a private sector manager can't ignore it, and a client will hear about them and expect to take advantage of them. So yes, they're very useful. Some do come with costs. The squirrel one is a good example, because generally that £50 a hectare, you're gonna expect to actually pay that. That's a grant you get, but you'll be pretty much passing it on probably to a professional squirrel management company. A wildlife trust in Cumbria is a good example, and it's a way of funding their activities, which has a benefit for the wider woodland. So yeah, all of those things are very helpful and are quite transformative. They're quite transformative to particularly broadleaf woodland and ancient semi-natural woodland, which is more likely to qualify for most of them. And people who've been largely doing woodland management and receiving nothing are suddenly finding a very large check. As I've got an example of somebody that signed up with 90 hectares of woodland and has been quite happily managing them away for years without receiving a penny, and now has now got a retirement plan, very nicely set up. So yeah, very, very helpful. Will it transform productive conifer stands into CCF? Then, well, that's I think you're going to need quite a lot of money to tip the balance. It's not going to be a case of £100 a hectare. I think the cost differential is much higher than that, and I'm not sure the grants would really transfer large areas. It will transfer some areas and some areas where it works for the particular client. And you will see a little bit more. It will probably help just encourage you to value those bits of woodlands in your estate a little bit more. So yeah, no, the grant's very useful, and yeah, it certainly will change behaviour.
Good, thanks very much. Would anyone, either Ted or Chris, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Ted's got his hand up. I'm sitting quiet.
I think that's a legacy.
I'd like to let other people speak. I think that my experiences of the grants are very helpful in helping people overcome hurdles. My experience again from Ireland is the grants that are now being offered for management planning, for training and tree marking and things like that. That's bringing a lot more people in. And I agree, it's down to the individual. What we're doing is giving more options for the woodland owner to decide how they want to invest and manage the resource. And the great challenge is this making the woodland pay. But my interest is the other payments that may come for carbon and other ecosystem services, which would not be possible with an even age system, which fit well in with CCF, and that's maybe where Chris is better able to answer on the policy aspects of it.
Thanks for that. Let's go to Paul. Actually, Paul, you've got your hand up. Have you got a question or something to add? Maybe have I muted everybody and people are unable to talk? Maybe. Sorry about that. I can't actually hear you, Paul.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, there you are. Yeah, hello.
Oh yeah. So I've had my woodland about 2 years. I've got less than 10 acres. I bought it because it's next to the home, and I didn't really want anybody else clattering around in there. And Storm Arwen came along soon after I bought it. But just listening to the whole presentation tonight, I mean, I do see a hell of a lot of value in, keeping good soil. And there was at one point a chart on the screen which demonstrated, I think, a 3-phase progression where, you're taking out certain trees and you're encouraging different levels of canopy and things like that. But you were, unless I misunderstood it, demonstrating that it was going to give you quite a good return if you did it like that. So having listened to David, who's working on, I think, a 40-year turnaround for timber rather than an 80-year round, and needing to make money, which is, definitely a point of interest. I value the concept very, very much. And I think that there is an enormous amount of people, as you've already told us, who have bought woodlands, and sometimes people who are in business who are savvy, who are buying it for many other reasons. And we must hark back to the initial question that you asked of how we value them. And I think the highest majority of the input that was given tonight was that we're doing it for nature and for people, sometimes above cost. And, I think that's my thing I want to try and pass over again.
Oh, that was terrible. I was muted. Thank you for that, Paul. I really appreciate that input. I think that's like, really for me, you've kind of done a better summary of everything than I could have. So, I mean, there wasn't a question in there, and I'm not going to ask anybody else what they think, because that's just like, I think we're at time, and that's how I want to leave it. I really appreciate you coming in with that, so thank you. If there's no other points, then I'll call the webinar there. I want to thank everybody for their input, particularly you, Dave, because I think that's the realism we need, and you've got an idea of what we're facing. But those presentations, Chris and Ted as well, were just like full of information, important information. So if possible, we'll share the presentations. If you'd like to, well, also, if there's any unanswered questions in the chat, I'll circulate an answered version of them. And any further information, get back in touch with us. Well, you'll also get an email with an invitation to join the tree marking course, which will figure out times and costs and things. But if you haven't already joined the field visit, then go on Cumbria Woodlands website and you'll find a link to that. I might also email around a link. So yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Good night.